lot of people believe marijuana is a harmless and natural life-enhancing substance with little or no negative impact. However, there are often unmentioned consequences to marijuana's growing presence in our society. And we need to look no further than the workplace to see what is playing out in our nation's workforce. Jo McGuire lives in Colorado, and she is an expert on the consequences of legalized marijuana on the state of Colorado, as well as marijuana's impact on the workforce. She is available to present to your organization, and we will provide her contact information at the conclusion of today's show. I'm Chris Wolfe, and welcome to the National Marijuana Initiative. Jo, what are the toughest challenges employers in Colorado are faced with since the legalization of marijuana?
Chris, the toughest challenges that employers are facing is finding a qualified employee to pass the pre-employment drug screen. And one of the interesting things that has happened since Colorado made recreational marijuana legal is that people come to the state or already live in the state, and it feels like a party environment. And so employers have a hard time keeping the boundaries of safety in place where employees keep pushing those boundaries, and they don't understand that we maintain strong employers' rights in our state, and all of our laws to date back up that employer to protect the safety of the workplace.
So if marijuana is legal and somebody uses marijuana on their personal time, why is that a problem if they test positive?
Sure, well, we do have a law on the books that says an employer cannot punish an employee for anything they do on their own time. However, there's a caveat at the end that says, as long as it does not impact their ability to work safely. Now I have these products that are much higher potency, they're stronger than ever before. People are reporting that they are feeling the high effect for 24 to 48 hours, especially with the edible products. So if someone is having a dinner party on Sunday night and there are a lot of marijuana edibles available, which is kind of what is trending, you could very well have someone come to work on Monday morning that is impaired and that is not safe to perform their workplace duties.
Have businesses actually moved their offices to other states or making other significant changes because of problems they're now having?
We have had some cases where businesses have pulled like franchise locations out of the state. We have some cases where small businesses have simply relocated altogether outside of Colorado. And then we also have some cases where large corporations wanted to come in and considered Colorado as a location to set up large plants or factories and chose not to.
And when a company decides to relocate due to the consequences of legalized marijuana, what is the impact to the local economy?
You know, we see impact in our community because we have, for instance, we had a company that moved out of a strip mall or a plaza mall, and they had a little clothing establishment. Actually, it was a costuming establishment, and a marijuana business moved in next door. And next thing they knew, all of their products and their clothing and materials smelled like marijuana. And so they decided to completely relocate. Now you have an empty space in the strip mall, and you have a commercial property owner that is struggling to find people to fill those spaces because the marijuana industry is in that space. You know, the marijuana industry will say, well, we'll make up for it by having more establishments.
So let's talk a little bit more about financial impact. What is the financial impact of employee substance use to an employer, and how is that calculated?
There are studies that show, Chris, that a small business owner can lose up to $7,000 a month in lost revenue. And how we calculate that is lack of productivity, employee turnover, absenteeism, tardiness, injuries, accidents. The employee who uses marijuana has 35% more industrial accidents, 55% more injuries than the employee who chooses not to.
How do you respond to people who say, what's the big deal about someone using a little pot if it's in the employee's personal time?
You know, you said a key phrase there, what's the big deal about a little pot? What we have in this day and age is no longer a little pot. It's not the weed that we had in the Woodstock days where the THC or tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive ingredient in cannabis, was at about 1 to maybe 3%. When Colorado legalized, our THC content was at 12 to 15%. Last year I was on a tour of a large marijuana grow and manufacturing operation where the owner bragged that he had just had raw cannabis returned from the lab, over 30% THC. We used to hear that THC couldn't even get that high in raw cannabis, but due to chemicals and all types of enhancements now in growing and technology, we're seeing stronger and stronger potencies. And then you have concentrates and edibles and vaping cartridges, which get up to 60, 70, 80, and 90% THC. If we were talking about the type of cannabis that existed back in the 60s and 70s, you and I probably wouldn't be having this conversation. It would likely be irrelevant. But because of these higher potency products and the difference that it's making in how people react to it and the length of time that they are impaired, it is a real issue. It's no longer just a little pot.
You just mentioned edibles. Isn't there a problem with the delayed reaction of edibles where people are taking more than they should and then there's a real negative outcome?
Absolutely. People don't understand that it has to get through your system. It has to get to where it enters the bloodstream before you feel the high. And so they'll wait a few minutes, they don't feel anything, they'll consume more. They'll wait a few minutes, they don't feel anything, they'll consume more. We have had a sharp increase in people reporting to the emergency room because they're feeling like they're having a psychotic break because they've overconsumed on edibles.
Now, aside from the high of marijuana use, talk a little bit about some of the other specific negative outcomes of employee marijuana use.
Well, I've been teaching signs and symptoms classes to employers for a decade. And we teach those classes for employers who need to do reasonable cause testing for people who may be under the influence at work. And 10 years ago when we taught this, we would say that the employee who uses marijuana may be drowsy, they may have a lackadaisical attitude, fall asleep at work, Now it's completely different. With these increased potencies, you have people who could have hallucinatory behaviors and even be prone to psychotic breaks. But in addition to that, the long-term marijuana user will struggle with multi-divided attention tasks, with learning new tasks, with taking in new information, with memory and comprehension. So employers need to be very aware. They need to understand that this has a direct impact on the ability of an employee to perform their day-to-day duties.
Now, even though marijuana is now legal to use in the state of Colorado, employers aren't tolerating its use during working hours, are they?
No, and that is something that Colorado State was very strong on. In fact, most states that have passed legal marijuana for recreational use maintain that employers do not have to tolerate use within the workplace.
Joe, now that marijuana is legal in a number of states, what does the future of our workforce look like?
I think that's an interesting question. I think there will be many challenges. For instance, the aerospace industry in the community in which I live has actually put out notices to the local high schools to say to the students, if you want a future in the aerospace industry, you'll stay clean and drug-free. I think there will be many challenges moving forward. I think young people are having a difficult time understanding that they will have to change their behaviors in order to have certain positions if they want them in certain careers.
Joe, the state of Colorado legalizes the use of marijuana. So does legalized marijuana actually equate to increased use by employees both on and off the job?
That's a really good question, Chris. It has equated to increased adult use in all age categories, but we see the sharpest spike in use amongst young people at the college age level. Incidentally, we also see an increase of use in senior citizens and those absolutely in the workforce. However, the law is very clear that marijuana use on the job is not to be tolerated.
And how about in states that allow medicinal marijuana use? Do employees qualify for American Disabilities Act protection?
At this point in time, as far as national law goes, it is not ADA protected. However, we are seeing in some cases where judges are ruling in favor of the employee who uses medical marijuana and stating that they should have some protection. Legal marijuana is causing many headaches for employers and much confusion between them and their attorneys on how to handle these situations.
Are employers in Colorado required to make accommodations for employees who use marijuana legally?
In Colorado, they are not. There are other states that do require that, such as Nevada. Nevada, when they passed their recreational marijuana law last year, that is a requirement. I do see that as more and more states legalize, the marijuana industry that is behind writing those laws, they are infringing more and more upon employers' rights.
So when we talk about accommodations that employers have to make for employees, what are we talking about? What does an employer have to do?
Well, if you're looking at what would normally be done for an ADA qualifying employee, you would see if they can work at home. You would see if there is some way to adjust their schedule or their duties. You know, you try to look and see ergonomically, even if there is a better way for them to work rather than what their normal tasks are. So how do you, you know, equate that to a medical marijuana user? It's just case by case.
What advice do you have for business owners in states where marijuana use is legal? I mean, an employer comes to you and says, Joe, what do I do?
Right. I have some very specific suggestions. First of all, hold the line. Review your workplace drug and alcohol policy. Then communicate the policy to your employees and create that culture of being a drug-free workplace. And then thirdly, you really must enforce that policy through a consistent drug and alcohol testing program. Because if you don't enforce the policy, then it has no teeth to it and people don't take it seriously.
Now, have you actually seen a corporate drug policy that includes the use of legalized marijuana and works?
No, I have not. Now,
Okay.
most of the employers that I work with, they are looking for a zero tolerance policy. I have seen in people that I work with personally, I've seen 2 companies that made accommodations for medical marijuana users, but they wanted it for a specific person. They did not want it as a blanket policy, so they made an exception. I do know that in Denver, there are some companies that say, you know, they allow recreational marijuana use because they believe it adds to creativity. They are not people who are typically looking at safety-sensitive employees. By and large, any employer who has an employee in a position where an accident or injury could occur, anyone who's in any way, shape, or form safety-sensitive, or anyone who should not be under the influence at work, then they would not allow the employees to have marijuana in their system.
And what's your take on drug testing if marijuana is legal, yet an employer's drug policy says an employee can be fired after using one time 30 days ago?
I'll tell you, it's the most successful way to enforce your policy and to help employees understand that there are boundaries here that are there to protect your safety.
And do the drug tests trump the law? For example, if an employer says no drug use over the past 30 days, but somebody tested positive for smoking once, can they lose their job, or are they protected by the law?
That's a good question. There is a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about how drug testing works. And what I say about that is the wrong people are driving the conversation in our nation. If an employee truly only uses one time, they are not going to test positive for marijuana 30 days later. That's not how the substance works. If it's true one-time use, that drug test will be clean within 2 to 3 days of that use, period. So right now, the only laws in place for drug testing really are the Omnibus Act for U.S. Department of Transportation safety-sensitive employees. There are a few states that have a few small rules here and there, but overall, there is no body of law over what we would say are non-DOT employees, which are the majority of employees in the U.S. So that failure of a drug test right now, it's up to the employer's discretion in all 50 states in how they respond to that. But I will say they really should have good documentation to back up their decisions.
Are businesses located in states that have legal marijuana use at risk, and what can employers do to protect those businesses?
I do think they are at risk. I do think that because, again, what we saw the first year after legalization in Colorado was positive drug test for THC, the impairing component in marijuana, went from the national average of 6% up to 20%, which is triple the national average. And in the state of Washington, they went up to 24%, 4 times the national average. So what that says to me is that employees heard, you know, it's a free-for-all. That's why I continue to use that terminology, is because employees said, hey, we can do whatever we want. And they didn't stop to consider that being under the influence at work is not okay. So what should employers do? Again, it goes back to that policy and enforcing that policy.
Is it true that in Colorado, marijuana use is so widespread that businesses have had to start hiring out-of-state employees who can pass the pre-employment drug screening tests?
There are employers who have stated publicly that when they receive federal dollars for a specific job, like repairing bridges and roadways, for those jobs, they must be drug-free under the Federal Safe and Drug-Free Workplace Act. They have stated that they have had to seek employees from out of state in order to fill those positions.
I read that the trucking industry has been affected greatly by legalized marijuana. So what makes marijuana one of the top legal issues facing the trucking industry?
You know, Chris, where I think that comes from is that we've had a few companies in Colorado who have said these are our challenges in hiring drivers with a commercial driver's license, which we refer to as CDL driver's license. One company says for every employee they have to hire, they interview 75 people before they can find one who will pass the test. Another company says it took them 3 months to find 2 qualified drivers who could pass the drug test.
You know, we frequently hear employers say it's so hard to find good people. So what would you suggest for employers who are having trouble attracting and retaining a competent, drug-free workforce?
You know, there are 2 employers in southern Colorado, Pueblo specifically, and Pueblo is a good epicenter of the recreational marijuana industry with retail stores and, you know, a lot of the business happening, booming in Pueblo. And for instance, we have one employer, Swordfiger Construction, where the owner, Keith Swordfiger, says, we kept our policies in place, we kept communication with our employees, they understood what the expectations were, we never wavered, and we quite frankly don't have a problem. And he said people in the community who know their reputation, they understand that if you want to work with them, you don't do drugs. Likewise, we have a utilities company in the same area that says the same exact thing. They said, we decided to take a hard line, and as of yet, we don't have a problem. I find that really fascinating because there's so many employers who say, we just can't find anyone. And I think what's happened is we have compromised and we've let the employees run the show rather than the employers. And in my opinion, it's a matter of holding that line very firmly and having strong communication and sending the message out that, you know, you don't cross the line here.
It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing you here today and having a chance to ask you all these questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris.
For traveling here and sharing time with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
We hope our interview today with Joe McGuire has expanded your thinking about the issues and potential consequences surrounding marijuana's impact on the workplace, not just from an employer's perspective, but from the point of view of the employee as well. We've learned that today's high-potency marijuana and the issue of legalization creates many challenges to employers and employees alike. People who live in states where marijuana use is legal must understand that employers have the right to set expectations regarding marijuana in the workplace, and employers have a right to protect the safety of their workplaces. In all fairness to employees, employers are encouraged to review their workplace drug policy, clearly communicate that policy to their personnel, and then be consistent with the application of that rule. Joe McGuire is available to speak to your organization. So for more information, please reach out to the National Marijuana Initiative. I'm Chris Wolfe, and thank you for joining us.